My name is Shannon Wiley, and I'm Deputy General Counsel for Secretary of State Mark Hammond. The Secretary of State's office is responsible for enforcing the South Carolina Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act, which regulates charitable organizations and professional fundraisers in the state of South Carolina. And as of now, the Secretary of State's office is also responsible for regulating nonprofit raffles. Until recently, raffles were illegal in the state of South Carolina, but that changed in November 2014 when voters approved a constitutional amendment to allow certain nonprofit organizations to hold raffles. That amendment was ratified by the state legislature in March of 2015, and as of April 4th, 2015, nonprofit organizations can hold raffles in the state. The purpose of this video is to walk you through the filing requirements with the Secretary of State's office. Now first, it's important to note what is a raffle. Under 3357-110 of the South Carolina Code, a raffle is defined as a game of chance in which a participant is required to pay something of value for a ticket for a chance to win a prize, and the winner is determined by a random drawing or similar process in which all participants have an equal chance of winning. Now, it's important to note that only certain types of nonprofit organizations can hold raffles in South Carolina. They have to meet a three-pronged test to see if they can hold raffles. The three-pronged test includes the following criteria. You have to look at what type of nonprofit organization is the organization that wants to hold the raffles, what is the purpose of that organization, and is the organization compliant with the South Carolina Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. The first thing you need to look at when you're determining if your nonprofit organization can hold a raffle is what type of nonprofit organization is it. The first thing to look at is whether or not the organization is recognized as tax exempt by the South Carolina Department of Revenue and the Internal Revenue Service. And it's not just whether or not the organization is tax exempt, but is it tax exempt under a certain IRS code section. The types of tax exempt organizations that could hold raffles include 501c3s, 501c4s, 501c6s, 501c7s, 501c8s, 501c10s, 501c19s, or 501d organizations. If you're not a tax-exempt organization, you must be a class, department, or organization of an educational institution as defined in the South Carolina Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. Now keep in mind, when we say educational institution, we mean an organization like a school that has a student body, a curriculum, and a faculty. Just having an educational component to your organization does not meet that threshold under the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. The second thing you look at is what is the purpose of the organization. And we're looking at generally organizations that have a charitable purpose, or religious, a scientific or literary purpose, an educational purpose, the purpose of fostering international or national amateur sports competition, or a purpose of being for the prevention of cruelty to children or animals. The third prong of the test is the organization must be compliant with the South Carolina Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. Generally, in order to solicit contributions in the state of South Carolina, an organization must be registered with the Secretary of State or have a current application for registration exemption on file with the Secretary of State's office. In order to solicit charitable funds, you generally either have to be registered or you have to be approved as exempt from registration. Now, there are some organizations that are not required to register with the Secretary of State or file that application for exemption, and that's generally churches, synagogues, mosques, and other houses of worship. Those organizations are excluded from regulation under the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act, and therefore would not be required to register as a charitable organization in order to conduct raffles. Now, it is important to note that you must pass all 3 prongs of that test in order to conduct raffles in the state of South Carolina. If your organization does not meet one of those prongs, it will not be able to conduct raffles. If your organization intends to conduct raffles, you are generally required to file a separate annual raffle registration form with the Secretary of State's office. And whether or not registration is required depends on what kind of raffles you want to conduct. And when we look at that, we look at whether or not the raffle is exempt or non-exempt under the raffle code section. Raffles that are exempt for the purposes of registration include a raffle in which a non-cash prize has been donated to the organization for purposes of the raffle, and the total value of the prize that's been donated or prizes for the entire event are $500 or less. The other type of exempt raffle includes 50-50 raffles, in which raffle tickets are sold to members or guests of an organization and not to the general public, and the total value of the proceeds collected is not more than $950. If you're going to have exempt raffles, you are limited to conducting or holding an exempt raffle only one time every 7 days. Non-exempt raffles may have larger prizes than exempt raffles. For example, in a non-exempt raffle, an individual prize may have a value that does not exceed the fair market value of $40,000, and the total fair market value of all prizes offered in a non-exempt raffle may not exceed $250,000. So you can see that for non-exempt raffles, the prize values are significantly higher than what's allowed for exempt raffles. A nonprofit organization may hold up to 4 non-exempt raffles a year. If a nonprofit organization intends to conduct non-exempt raffles or have both exempt and non-exempt raffles, it must register with the Secretary of State's office. Now, to register for the purpose of conducting raffles, you must submit an annual raffle registration form to the Secretary of State along with the registration fee of $50. An organization must only file 1 raffle registration each year. One of the questions that we've gotten is whether or not they have to file a separate form for each raffle, and that's not correct. You just have to file 1 registration form in order to conduct 4 different non-exempt raffles during the year. And keep in mind, the raffle registration is separate and apart from the registration that you would file under the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. This registration form is due on the 15th day of the 5th month or 4.5 months after the end of the organization's fiscal year. Our most common fiscal year dates that we see with nonprofit organizations are from January 1st to December 31st and July 1st to June 30th. If you have that January 1st to December 31st fiscal year date, that registration will need to be renewed on May 15th. And if you have the July 1st to June 30th date, which is really common with a lot of the educational institutions that register with our office, that registration date will expire on November 15th. Now, if you have a fiscal year date that is separate than those other ones that we just talked about, that's perfectly acceptable. The expiration date for the raffle registration will just be 4.5 months after the end of the fiscal year. Now, if you have affiliates or subsidiaries of your organization that share your EIN number, those organizations can also do up to 4 non-exempt raffles a year, provided they file a separate registration form. In addition to filing a registration form, a nonprofit organization that registers for the purposes of conducting raffles must also file an annual financial report with the Secretary of State. Again, this is due on the 15th day of the 5th month or 4.5 months after the end of the organization's fiscal year. So it's basically due at the same time the organization's raffle registration expires. And keep in mind that unlike annual financial reports that are filed under the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act, no filing extensions are provided for annual raffle financial reports. So that's basically, it's due as soon as your annual raffle registration expires. The annual raffle financial report must contain the following information for each non-exempt raffle that was held by the nonprofit organization. This includes the amount of the gross receipts, an itemized list of expenses incurred or paid, or expenditures to be made, including the name of each person, company, or governmental entity to whom the expense was paid or will be paid, and a detailed description of the merchandise purchased or services rendered. The raffle financial report must also include the amount of net receipts, which is the amount that is left over after you pay for all cash prizes and prizes purchased by the organization for the raffle, as well as all allowable expenses, the use to which the net receipts have been or are to be applied, a list of the prizes offered and given with the estimate of their values, and the number of raffle tickets sold. The annual raffle registration form and the annual raffle financial report are available on the Secretary of State's office website at www.sos.sc.gov. You may find these forms under the Forms and Fees sections, and you may also register and file your annual financial report online. Now, if you fail to file your annual financial report on time, you may be assessed an administrative fine of $10 for each day of noncompliance, not to exceed $2,000 for each separate violation. Also, failure to pay the fine and file the report may result in the revocation of the organization's registration, and the Secretary of State's office can pursue injunctive relief against any delinquent organization in the South Carolina Administrative Law Court. Separate and apart from the fines for delinquent annual financial reports, the Secretary of State's office may impose administrative fines of up to $500 or seek injunctive relief for any other violations of the statutory provisions governing raffles. And this fine may be assessed for each violation and each day a person or organization is in violation of any provision of the code governing raffles. If you or your organization is assessed an administrative fine or has its registration suspended or revoked or is denied registration by the Secretary of State, you have 30 days to file an appeal with the Administrative Law Court. So any administrative actions taken by the Secretary of State's office are appealable to the Administrative Law Court. However, if you do receive a fine, it is important that you contact our office. We are willing to work with organizations that have been fined, and we understand that mistakes happen. So if you get that certified letter in the mail, give us a call and we'll be happy to work with you. One of the questions we get a lot is whether or not a charitable organization can hold a casino night. And under the current statute governing raffles, as well as the South Carolina Constitution, casino nights and other gambling events still remain illegal unless the event is conducted solely for entertainment purposes and no prizes, financial awards, or incentives are received by the players. Likewise, any events using electronic gambling devices, video poker, slot machines, or any kind of wagering on sports events are still not permitted in South Carolina. If you have any questions about nonprofit raffles, please feel free to contact me directly or contact the Secretary of State's office. We'll be happy to help you with whatever you need in terms of registration or any questions on what you can and cannot do when conducting nonprofit raffles. Thank you so much for your time, and please visit our website for additional information.